Why do I have acid reflux every day? Well, in this video, I'm going to answer what is acid reflux, why it's happening so frequently, what started it in the first place, and then give you some options for relief today, but also how to heal your esophagus and stomach naturally for long-term lasting resolution. Let's jump in. Really quick, imagine that this balloon here is your stomach and this bottle is your esophagus. Acid reflux is what happens when the contents of your stomach, including the acid, flows backwards into the esophagus, like so. And so when you have that bathing effect or the splashing effect of the acid on the inside of your esophagus, it leads to damage, inflammation, and that leads to the symptoms that we know and love. The heartburn, the regurgitation, the voice changes, bad breath sometimes, and even upper respiratory issues depending on how far up it's going. You'll notice that your reflux probably happens more after eating, and that makes sense because now your stomach releases the acid and it starts doing its job of mashing up and digesting food, and so the fluid comes back up. And you also probably notice it happens more often when you sleep, and that's because when you lay down, now gravity is helping that acid get into the esophagus. So the real question is, why does it flow backwards in the first place? Well, the problem is there's actually a valve right here that sits between your stomach and your esophagus, and it's called the lower esophageal sphincter, or LES for short, and it's supposed to be a one-way valve, but when you have acid reflux, over time that valve has become strained and it's just not doing its job very well anymore, and so it's getting weaker and it's not as able to completely seal off that stomach from the acid coming back up. And so that's what's really going on when you have acid reflux, and the root cause is that LES malfunctioning. So the way that I see it, you have two options. You can either, number one, manage the symptoms. That is, take medication or make behavior modifications to reduce the amount of acid that's coming up, or tamp down and dull the acid that's coming up so it doesn't burn as bad. Option number two would be to actually improve and regain a lot of the LES function that you've lost. Because if that LES was closing appropriately, you'd be able to tolerate more foods, the acid wouldn't come up, and you wouldn't be so dependent on medications. Now, each one has its pros and cons. Let's go through both so we can kind of weigh and you can decide what's best for you. All right, let's cover symptom relief first. Now, the good thing about symptom relief is obviously you relieve the symptoms, so you have some relief in the short term, but oftentimes these have long-term consequences, and this is especially true with the medications. So first of all, you have the basic antacids. These are your things like aluminum hydroxide, magnesium hydroxide, sodium bicarbonate, calcium carbonate, and the brand names are things you'd recognize the most probably, things like Tums, Alka-Seltzer, Mylanta, Rolaids, these sorts of things. These antacids work by buffering the acid in your stomach. So your acid's still producing acid, it's just getting tampened down and buffered, basically to neutralize it so it doesn't create as much inflammation in your esophagus. Then you have things like H2 blockers and PPIs, proton pump inhibitors. Basically what those do is they reduce the amount of acid that your stomach can release. So these medications do a great job at tampering down how effective that acid is so that it creates less irritation in your esophagus and therefore less symptoms. The downside, of course, is that acid has a really important function in your body. Number one, it's there to break down and dissolve food so that you can absorb more nutrients from what you eat. And so when we're on these medications long term, one of the things that they've found and been able to measure is sometimes there's less nutrient absorption from what you eat when you're on these medications. That can have long-term effects like not having enough calcium to build bones and then potentially more bone fractures. So those sorts of things. Number two is that acid's also really important to kill any bacteria that are traveling into your body along with the food that you eat. That acid, one of the things it does is it kills those bacteria. It's got that natural protective ability. And so when we tame that acid and make it less acidic, it's going to kill less bacteria and have the potential to allow more things in, create dysbiosis in our gut, so on and so forth. Other things you can do to manage the symptoms is, first of all, prop up yourself when you sleep. Don't just prop up your head on a pillow. You can actually angle your whole bed by putting a few things underneath the legs of your bed to elevate your whole body so your head and your chest and your upper body are above where your stomach would be. That would allow gravity to then keep the acid down. You can also just eat smaller meals because the less that the stomach is extended, when you eat big meals, there's going to be more stress on that sphincter and more fluid's going to tend to come up, and so more reflux. You can avoid eating within 3 hours of going to bed. That will allow the stomach to empty completely, and you'll have less reflux symptoms that way when you go to lay down. And then anything you can do to reduce or quit smoking and drinking. Both of those things are big parts of acid reflux. So those are definitely some things that you can do today to reduce symptoms if you're not doing them already. There's also some things you can do with your diet. So if you're eating some of the common food triggers, which I'll list here, then you can try testing and pulling some of those out of your diet and seeing if you have less reflux by doing that. Everyone's a little bit different here. So one thing, for instance, if spicy food triggers one person, you'll find that other people do it just fine, but it's very hit or miss. And so you have to test for yourself. Keep a food journal, a food log, so that you can actually measure symptoms each time after you eat, and then you can see what may have caused it. Now, if one of these things, these common triggers, is something that you really love and enjoy, there is some evidence to show that if you eat foods in combination to buffer out those triggering properties, then they'll balance each other out. And so when you eat them together, then you won't have as many symptoms. And so those common buffers are things, especially like dairy, milk, cheese, these sorts of things. And you have to be careful with this because sometimes that dairies, those things, they can actually become triggers as well. So it just becomes person by person, but it might be something you try. Awesome, now let's talk about going for the root cause. And this is a really important piece because when we are able to resolve the root cause and improve and strengthen your LAS function, you can start to eat more foods again, so you don't have as many food triggers because it's sealing off the stomach altogether and it's allowing the esophagus to heal. Number two is you have less dependency on medication, again, because the acid works, it's contained, and so you don't need to battle it back down or neutralize it. And number three, you'll have a tendency for way longer term results because the problem itself is actually resolved. You're not just masking the symptoms anymore. Now, when it comes to fixing the LAS, we first have to ask ourselves the question, well, what caused it to weaken in the first place? And usually this process didn't happen immediately. Usually it's a multiple factors that built up over time that caused stress on the sphincter and allowed it to weaken. Now we can break those factors that influence the weakening of our LAS into two groups. Number one is the pressure builders, and number two is the sphincter disruptors. Now, pressure builders are anything that increases the intragastric pressure within your stomach and your abdomen. I'm going to list all of those here. What happens is when you put more pressure on your stomach, on your abdomen, and in the stomach itself, you're pushing and forcing that sphincter to have to close tighter and work double time. And you can imagine the effect of that immediately, but also the effect of that over long stretches of time. And so if you've carried a lot of weight, for instance, over time, if you've done some of the things on this list, or if you've had other digestive issues that play in, then that could be a factor of why it failed. And if we eliminate these things, you allow the sphincter to get some relief and start to heal itself. The next group is sphincter disruptors. So I'll list those here. And what a sphincter disruptor is basically anything that inhibits the proper functioning of the LAS sphincter. And so anything that allows it to relax, anything that interferes with the signals that it reaches from the brain, all that automation that happens. Now, I'm not going to dive into them here, but you can go watch more about them if you're interested by clicking the link up here to a video where I talk more about all the root causes and the drivers. Now, you may find that you have 1, 2, or even more of these leading factors that cause the LAS to weaken. And if that's you, no worries, just understand that these things happen over time. And so when it comes to addressing the root cause, you can't expect it to happen as fast as like popping a Tums would change things. It's going to take a few months to actually notice significant changes in your LAS function. But the benefit, of course, is that even though it takes more work and more time, you get that true resolution rather than just masking the symptoms and crossing our fingers and hoping it doesn't get any worse. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe down below. And if you're looking for a solution that combines the best of both worlds, not only managing the symptoms in the short term, but resolving the root causes for long-term resolution, then you might check out my ultimate guide for stomach acid and acid reflux. That's available in the link in the description. In that, I go a lot deeper into the causes, the different food triggers, as well as put forward a blueprint that you can follow to actually resolve this thing for good. And so go check that out if you're interested. Otherwise, we'll see you in the next video. Thank you.